Hello everyone, Furina the Hydro Archon is having her second rerun banner in the second half of patch 5.4. Ever since her release, Furina has cemented herself as one of the best units in the game for both her ability to deal damage and the strong buff she provides to a variety of teams. However, it has been quite a while since Furina's initial release, and ever since then we've gotten more and more strong units, especially after the introduction of Notlan. So has Furina remained a future-proof pool, and is she still one of the best supports in the game today? Because this channel really started with the release of Furina's beta kit, I wanted to address her state in the current meta with an updated guide and analysis on her current strength and pull value, as well as give my thoughts on how good Furina will be in the future. Since Furina has been out for over a year now, there are plenty of great detailed guides already made by others, so I will keep my guide portion brief. Furina's main role in teams is to provide solid off-field hydro damage and elemental application with her skill, while buffing her team's damage with her elemental burst. Her skill has two forms, Usia and Numa. While in her default form, Usia, her skill will spawn 3 hydro animals by her side that follow the active character and deal damage to nearby enemies. This damage scales off HP and will drain your entire team's HP. If you use your charged attack on Furina, she will swap to her other form, Numa. In this form, her skill will spawn a solitary singer that will heal the active character. There are some unique optimization cases where you can use Furina's healing form, but generally it isn't used in normal rotations. Furina's elemental burst deals damage and allows your team to start generating a resource called fanfare. Every percent of HP lost or healed by any member on the team will generate 1 fanfare stack, and fanfare stacks will give damage bonus and healing bonus to the team. At C0, the maximum fanfare you can get is 300, resulting in 75 damage bonus and 30 healing bonus to the team with talent level 10. However, this buff takes time to stack, and not every team has enough healing to generate stacks very fast. So in many calcs, an average of 150 or 200 stacks is typically assumed depending on the team, though in reality the actual number is much more dynamic. Lastly, the two main passive talents you need to know about Furina's kit are 1. Her A4 passive, which increases her skill's damage and healing rate based on her HP, and 2. Her A1 passive, which will allow Furina to heal the entire party if the active character is overhealed via healing that isn't from Furina. This A1 passive is very important, and it is the main reason single target healers can synergize with Furina despite her draining her entire team's HP with her skill. That's everything on Furina's base kit. Both her skill and burst are important, so level them both equally. Then prioritize leveling her to 90 as she gains more value from the extra stats as an HP scaler. And in actual gameplay, she's generally just a skill burst swap out support, so very simple to play. In terms of Furina's best build options, she has a lot of great weapons to choose from. Her signature is aesthetically the best fit for her and generally the best choice to maximize her personal damage, as the special passive gives elemental skill damage bonus and HP. However, there are 2 other 5-star weapons that can match or even surpass the performance of her signature. First is Chiori's signature weapon, Uraku Misugiri. If you have a Geo character on the team, this weapon also gives a lot of damage boost to Furina, increasing her personal damage by a similar amount as her signature. Second is Nilu's signature weapon, Key of Kashinetsu. Although this weapon isn't the best for increasing Furina's personal damage, the elemental mastery buff it provides to the team is very valuable in reaction-based teams like Quick Plume and Vaporize, and since Furina is going to have a lot of HP, she's going to share a lot of EM, making Key her best weapon in terms of team DPS for teams that can utilize the EM buff. For 4-star weapons, Festering Desire will be her best personal damage option, but if you weren't able to get this weapon from the 1.2 event, the Fontaine fishing weapon works similarly and is a great accessible free-to-play option. Lastly, Favonia's sword is a very strong 4-star weapon for her as it helps meet Furina's ER requirements more easily with its high ER subset and extra particles, especially when she's the only hydro character on the team. For artifact sets, the best general recommendation is 4-piece Golden Troop because of the large amount of elemental skill damage bonus it provides, which boosts Furina's off-field personal damage. However, if you want to optimize even further, 4-piece Tenacity of the Millelith can be Furina's best artifact set for teams that can take advantage of its 4-piece attack buff. Even though this set isn't the best for Furina's personal damage, she can maintain the 20% attack buff permanently, which can be more valuable to a team than Furina's personal damage. For C6 Furina's, just go 2-piece HP or 4-piece Maruchusi Hunter. For artifact main stats, Hourglass is either HP or energy recharge, which really depends on your weapon choice. Goblet is HP or hydro damage bonus, with HP being generally preferred, and Circlet is crit or HP, with crit generally being better. In terms of Furina's ER requirements, Kaching Mains has a nice table for C0 Furina that I'll show here with many ranges for different scenarios you can follow. Of course, building more doesn't hurt as you really want Furina's burst to be up every rotation. Personally, I like the 160 to 200 ER range depending if Furina is double or solo hydro. As an off-field hydro DPS and support, Furina can work well with the majority of the characters in Genshin, whether meta or non-meta, as both her element and buffs make her very versatile. The only requirement for Furina teams is to have a healer to sustain her HP drain and generate fanfare stacks to maintain a large damage buff. Almost every single healer in the game works with Furina. Team-wide healers are especially comfortable to maintain team HP and can easily generate fanfare fast. However, single target healers are also very strong, if not better in many scenarios. Even though the team HP might get dicey in practice and will generate fanfare slower, single target healers can heal enough to proc Furina's A1 overheal passive for additional team healing. And many of these single target healers provide additional buffs that are very valuable, such as Bennett's attack buff or Shilonen's res shred. To keep the team's discussion short, I will highlight Furina's main team archetypes here, showcasing some of the best DPS or support options within each archetype. First are mono Hydro teams, with the primary and strongest one being centered around Neuvillette. Furina is Neuvillette's best teammate, as along with Hydro Resonance and shared Hydro Particles, Neuvillette has self-healing, helping to max out Furina's fanfare quickly. A subsection of mono Hydro teams is the double Hydro core of Furina and Yelan. Hydro Resonance buffs both Furina and Yelan's damage, and they both lower each other's ER requirements significantly. Along with a healer, this core can carry the damage of any DPS while also providing buffs to them. Raiden and Navia are two notable examples, but the one DPS that takes advantage of this core the best is Hu Tao, who can consistently vapor attacks with the Furina-Yelan duo. This leads to Furina's second main team archetype, Vaporize. For pyro carries with higher levels of pyro application, you can stick with the double Hydro core to sustain reverse vapes. For other pyro carries and Chaska, Furina's Hydro application alone can enable consistent vape reactions. Alongside buffers and healers like Bennett, Shilonen, and Xianyin for plunge teams, Furina is a great support for vape teams. Instead of enabling reactions for a pyro main DPS, however, you can enable forward vapes for Furina herself, as she does deal a decent amount of damage. In these teams, you typically use Xiangling for the necessary pyro application to vape Furina's attacks, and you can also add in units like Wriothesley and Knight for extra melts or burning uptime. Third are the Dendro related teams. While Furina can technically work in Nilou Bloom, she generally shines in Hyper Bloom oriented teams, whether in double Electro with an Electro main DPS like Cloran, or double Dendro with a Dendro main DPS like Alhaitham. Along with her team damage buff, Furina's slower Hydro application can allow for both Hyper Bloom generation and higher quicken uptime for spreads and aggravates. Fourth are freeze teams. In the right combat scenarios, Furina is great for enabling freeze for cryo carries with her Hydro application while providing a damage buff, as long as you have a healer like Charlotte, Shilonen, or an Animo healer. Fifth are Electrocharge teams. With Furina's damage bonus and Oberon holding 4-piece scroll, you'll have a ton of buffs for your main carry, which will typically be an Electro main DPS. But you can also have a Swirl Driver as the on-field carry instead, which will allow for a ton of reactions in AoE scenarios. Furina's last main team archetype is where her Hydro application isn't necessary, and she's mainly used as just a pure buffer and sub-DPS. In these teams, Furina is not enabling reactions for damage, but simply buffing an Animo, Geo, or physical main DPS while providing extra off-field DPS. With the guide information covered, let's analyze how good of a character Furina is right now in terms of overall meta strength and pull value. Though Furina is an extremely powerful Hydro support, like all characters, her kit does come with some weaknesses. First, and the most obvious issue, is Furina's team-wide HP drain, requiring you to run a healer on your team. Luckily, team-wide healers still give a lot of comfort, and many single-target healers provide valuable buffs as well, so Furina's healing requirement isn't too much of an issue. But it is still a team-building restriction nevertheless that can prevent other supports from fitting into the team. Second is her skill cooldown, which is 20 seconds. For most players, this cooldown isn't that much of an issue because people don't play perfectly and will naturally extend the rotation in actual combat. However, when theory crafters are calcing, or if you're trying to optimize team rotations, a 20-second cooldown is annoying to play around because most characters have shorter cooldowns on their important skills. So when playing with Furina, you're forced to extend the team's rotation to play around her 20-second cooldown, which lowers the team's theoretical DPS. Furina's third flaw is her skill's duration. While her skill cooldown is 20 seconds, it actually lasts 30 seconds, so her off-field damage and Hydro application has permanent uptime, which sounds like a good thing. But there are scenarios where her skill's full uptime can be a detriment to a team. For instance, let's say you're playing a Malwika vape team with Furina, Shilonen, and Bennett. Shilonen has 4-piece scroll, so you want to apply Pyro with Malwika's skill, Shilonen's skill, and N2 to activate the 4-piece scroll damage buff, and her res shred, then use Furina and Bennett's support skills before dishing out damage with Malwika. All is good until you start the second rotation. Ideally, you do the same setup of Malwika applying Pyro into Shilonen's skill to get a Pyro crystallized to reactivate the 4-piece scroll damage buff for Malwika. However, because Furina's skill is still active because of its 30-second duration, her off-field Hydro application can wipe Pyro away from the enemy, meaning that Shilonen can't get a Pyro crystallized and Malwika won't be buffed by 4-piece scroll. And most of the time, it's just best to accept that the 4-piece scroll buff will have inconsistent uptime, which isn't ideal. Lastly, the attacks from Furina summons are a bit inconsistent as each of the 3 pets has its own elemental ICD. So even in single target, her Hydro application actually has a bit of RNG, to the point that it can mess up the reactions of teams like Vape if the timing of her Hydro application goes badly. And in AoE scenarios, the 3 Hydro summons can attack different enemies, resulting in split damage and Hydro app. Despite these inherent issues in Furina's kit, for the most part, they are largely overshadowed by what Furina provides to a team. Off-field Hydro application, decent personal damage as a sub-DPS, and a significant team damage bonus from her burst. All of this combined make Furina a very strong support that can fit into so many different teams. And on her release, Furina's supportive capabilities easily made her one of the best characters in Genshin, as few characters provided as much utility as she did. Furina was a clear top 2 character meta-wise along with Bennett, and you could make a strong argument for Furina being the absolute best character in the game. But as time has passed and new stronger characters have been released, it is only normal for Furina to have more competition. So has she still remained as one of the best supports in the game, being a future-proof unit? I think there are two main ways of analyzing Furina's current state in the meta. First is giving more value into her versatility. At the end of the day, Furina still provides off-field damage, hydro application, and a team buff, things that almost every single team can benefit from, making her a good support with almost every single DPS in Genshin, even the newer released ones. If you value this flexibility combined with her strength, then Furina is still one of the best supports in the game, changing little from her release. However, another way you can look at Furina's power level is through an optimized mindset. This outlook on the meta is much more strict, focusing on the best teams in terms of damage that are built around the top tier DPSs. And if you analyze Furina with this perspective, you'll see that Furina isn't actually the best support choice in a lot of meta teams. Because of this, you could even argue that Furina isn't that good of a 5-star support to invest in right now unless you have a few select 5-star main DPSs. To illustrate this view, let's focus on evaluating Furina with the DPSs that are considered good or above average in the meta. Now, which DPSs fit this category? While I was lurking in the J-Stern stream, he commented that most of the good and meta-relevant DPSs in Genshin are all released during and after Fontaine. And while this may sound a bit elitist from a TC and calcing perspective, he's not really wrong. Compared to many earlier released DPSs, newer released characters just have a higher baseline in their damage output. Characters have been slowly getting stronger and stronger once Fontaine released, and with the release of Notlan, the damage power creep has only quickened. The two main DPSs that were considered good that were released before Fontaine are Hu Tao and Alhaitham, and coincidentally, both their best teams are with Furina, Double Hydra Hu Tao with Shilonen and Quick Bloom Alhaitham. Now starting from Fontaine's release, we have Linny. While he is designed to be a mono pyro DPS, on paper, Linny Vape with Furina is his highest DPS team, so another scenario where Furina is actually the best support choice. Next is Neuvillette. In terms of damage, there is a big difference between Neuvillette with and without Furina because of the synergy between their kits, so Furina is again the best support choice here as well. But this is where Furina being the best support for teams ends. Wriothesley Vape Melt with Furina is definitely one of his strongest teams, but Rio Melt with Malwika is now his best team in terms of damage. Navia Double Hydro or with Furina Bennett are both solid teams, but with the release of Malwika and Shilonen, the Double Pyro Navia team is her new best team. Sneaking in Gaming here because he is competitive with other 5-star DPSs at C6, Furina Vape Plunge is one of his best teams, but on paper, Silali Melt Plunge does the most damage. Arlecchino doesn't work with Furina because she can't get healed. Cloran Hyperbloom with Furina is a good team, but Chevre's Overload, especially with Eonsun's release, will be Cloran's highest DPS team. Then into Notlan, Furina is a solid support for Molani as long as you use Shangling, but based on calcs, Malwika is the overall better pyro support for her, which means Furina isn't used. Kanich with Furina was never his best team option assuming you owned Emily, but even if you don't own Emily, Auron is arguably a better substitute for Kanich than Furina on paper. Malwika Vape teams with Furina are obviously very strong, but of course Melt with Sitlali is a much higher damaging team. And lastly, Verisa with Furina, Shenyun, and Eonsun is looking to be one of her solid team options. But yet again, Chevre's Overload is generally looking like Verisa's best team option based on pre-release calcs. So Furina is only the best support choice for 4 meta main DPSs, Hu Tao, Alhaitham, Linny, and Neuvillette. For everyone else except Arlecchino, Furina is still a good option, but with an optimized mindset, this isn't good enough. Just like how it doesn't make much meta sense to play Ayato main DPS when you could just play Neuvillette, why play Furina in a team with Malwika for instance when her Melt team is just a better team that deals way more damage? The simple explanation of why Furina isn't the absolute best support choice for a lot of meta teams now is because there are more support options that allow for higher overall team damage than there was during Furina's release. The release of Chevre's was one of the earliest examples of support competition, as her kit provides massive buffs to Pyro and Electro DPSs in Overload teams, making Chevre's Overload one of the best or the best team archetype for most Pyro and Electro DPSs. With Notlan's release, there were new artifacts, and the 4-piece scroll set allows for any Notlan support to give 40% damage bonus to the elements of the reaction they trigger, meaning that any Notlan support can have their own version of Furina's burst buff. Next, Shilonen was released, being another very strong and versatile support by bringing easy to access res shred, though Shilonen does synergize with Furina as she is a healer as well. But then, patch 5.3 dropped, which introduced Sitlali, a very potent Melt support who enables Melt to be the best team for many Pyro DPSs, and Malwika, who is typically acknowledged as the best DPS, but she's also one of the best supports as well, bringing pyro application, team buffs, and significant damage with her burst. And with 5.5, Yansan is releasing, who is looking to be another top meta attack buffer. All of these new support options create newer and stronger team archetypes for main DPSs while leaving Furina a bit behind. On Furina's release, she could have been considered the jack of all trades, master of all, since most supports didn't provide the level of utility that Furina did. But now, Furina is trending closer to being the jack of all trades, master of none. While her off-field Hydra application hasn't had new alternatives, her personal damage as a sub-DPS and team buffs have. I think a lot of people actually overestimate the amount of damage Furina does with her skill and the buff she provides with her burst when she's solo Hydro. Her off-field damage is definitely good, but not something super insane, and because fanfare generation depends on the healer and requires time to stack, the average damage bonus she provides to a team is very likely not the max she can provide. Thus, Furina definitely does good personal damage and provides a nice team buff, but for many DPSs, there are better options that either provide more personal damage, a bigger team buff, or both, resulting in overall higher team DPS. For the basis of my meta analysis, I always assume C0 5 stars. However, with Furina already rerunning several times, vertical investment is likely, and her early constellations C1 to C3 are pretty strong. C1 increases her maximum fanfare by 100 and also allows Furina to instantly start off with 150 fanfare when she uses her burst. C2 makes fanfare generation 2.5 times faster and gives Furina extra HP for any fanfare generated that exceeds her limit of 400, thus increasing her personal damage, and C3 increases her burst count level by 3, which increases her fanfare to team damage bonus and healing bonus conversion. A lot of people consider Furina's C2 her best constellation, and it is very good for her as it can double her personal damage and increases the average fanfare generated, resulting in an overall larger average team damage bonus. But her C1 and C3 are both arguably just as good. The instant 150 fanfare from C1 greatly fixes the ramping issue her burst has, allowing for a higher average damage bonus buff, and the increased fanfare conversion from C3 is very beneficial considering you're gaining so much fanfare with C1 and C2. Thus, C1, C2, and C3 are all good and give similar value for Furina, showing some of her weaknesses and giving her a lot of stronger supported and damage capabilities. Concerning Furina works with so many characters in the game, getting constellations for her is a buff to a lot of teams. If you value this versatility, then Furina's constellations may be worth pulling. However, with an optimized meta mindset, it may not be worth vertically investing in Furina. Sure, you can get C2 Furina and she'll improve a lot of teams, but even with C2 Furina, the Furina team may not be the clear best team. For instance, C2 Furina with Varisa, C0 Shenyin, and C2 Yansan is looking to be only about equal to her Chevreuse Overload team, assuming C6 Chevreuse and C2 Yansan. In addition, you may just get more value in vertically investing in another support. For instance, C2 Furina busts Mawika Vape, but you could also just get C2 of Shilonen or Sitlali, which would significantly increase Mawika's Melt team's damage to be much more than her Vape team, and you still buff other teams as Shilonen and Sitlali can be used with others. Lastly, with newer character releases increasing the overall unit power level, it may just be best to save your Primo Gems to pull for the newer characters. How good Furina is as a support ultimately depends on how a person defines meta. If you're someone that likes to optimize and wants to play the character's best team in terms of damage, then Furina has lost a lot of her value compared to when she released, as newer release supports perform better for a lot of the meta main DPSs. Furina is only best in slot for 4 of the good DPSs in the game. Otherwise, Furina is generally not the best option, so she's arguably not a good support to invest in since you would rather play another better team. However, this optimized meta mindset assumes you have access to all the meta characters so you are able to play these optimized teams. But the reality is that for many people, they don't have all the meta characters and can't always play the best team of a specific main DPS. This is where Furina's flexibility and versatility comes in. Even though Furina is not the best option for most meta DPSs, that doesn't mean those teams are bad. Even today, Furina teams are still a solid team option for many characters, whether meta or non-meta. So when you tie in Furina's ability to be played in many teams while still being a good option, then Furina can still be considered one of the most value supports you could have on your account. Ultimately, both perspectives are simultaneously true. From a strict meta standpoint, Furina is no longer the best support in the game as she's not the best option for a lot of meta DPSs. But even though she's not the best option, Furina teams are still good options for most, and this versatility allows Furina to still be one of the most value supports you could pull in terms of team building. Looking ahead, I think this trend will continue. For example, when Skirk releases as a likely new top tier DPS, I don't expect Furina to be the best support for her, but it's definitely unlikely that Furina will be a bad team option for her. You could view this as Furina continuing to lose her meta value as a support, or you could see this as Furina being resilient to power creep as she's still a good team option. Thus, the true final verdict on Furina's state in the meta ultimately falls to you. I hope this update updated guide and analysis on Furina was helpful to you all. Just clicking and watching the video helps the channel out immensely, and if you want to show even more support, consider liking or sharing the video, or feel free to click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on new Genshin videos in the future. Leave any questions in the comments, and with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.